people, the great Jehovah, pilgrim through this barren land.
Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to Hope for a Wandering Amish. We're really happy to have our guest, Hector Troyer, back again. We've had him on before, and we all really enjoyed having him, and I think he really enjoyed being with us because he came back again. So, welcome back, Brother Hector. It's good to have you.
Thank you.
So, Hector and his family live in State College, Pennsylvania, and Hector has a really interesting topic for us here this morning. So, I'm sure you'll really enjoy it. So why don't we have a prayer, and the time will be yours, Hector.
Thank you.
Father, we thank you for this morning, and we thank you for this time together. Thank you for everyone that joined us here this morning, and we pray that this time could be profitable and productive for your kingdom, and that it would be a topic that would glorify your name, and that your kingdom purposes could be further established in each one of us. Bless us all and help us all to love you more and be a set apart people and a people that glorify your holy name. Bless Hector as he shares. In the precious name of Jesus, amen. All right, the time is yours, Brother Hector.
All right, thank you for that. So, my topic this morning is about recasting a vision for rural church, and that is, in a lot of circles, that's a controversial subject because there's a lot of focus on city mission. So, I want to talk about some of the advantages of the city mission, some of the advantages of our traditional rural church planting, and some of the disadvantages of both. So a lot of people wonder, how can we be evangelistic in the country, because we have this thing of thinking that we have to be on a big farm back a long lane and be able to raise our children to keep them safe from all the evil influences like in the city or in towns, but then that isolates us from all the people that we're trying to reach. So we're stuck feeling like there is this like we can't do both. So I want to talk about how we can do both. And I don't think rural churches are out of touch for God's will for the gospel. I think we can spread the gospel even while being in a in a rural setting. And some of you may not. Rural means country. Urban means city, and I should maybe be using those terms just to keep from confusing, because I have taken me a long time to figure out which one's which. I don't know if it's dyslexia or what, but I'm trying not to use the wrong term in the wrong place, or y'all will be more confused. But city missions are really the buzz again today, especially if you're listening to people that are in the Followers of the Way or Finney Curavilla crowd. He's really promoted that, done a good job of it, and I feel like they have done a lot of good with that movement. But I don't think it's the only movement. I've read his book. I've passed out hundreds of them, and I think it's great. But at the same time, I hear a lot of people read his book, King Jesus Claims His Church. They'll read that book and they'll come back and they'll say, well, I don't want to go to the city. Like, I don't feel like city's for me or for my family. And it's almost like a way of saying, the whole idea is just a bad idea because I don't want to go to the city. So I was thinking about that. The city is only one component of the vision for kingdom churches. It doesn't have to be city. So that was my thought, is we need to, just because you can't go to the city, that doesn't mean that you're automatically just a second-class Christian or something. That's not the way that works. Or even not as effective. Like, I think we can be just as effective in the country if we steward our gifts wisely. So what can we learn about our recent history of church plants? We see a lot of attempted city missions that have failed. and that's not a reason to not do them, but it is something that we need to be that we need to think about, and that we need to kind of understand that if these things, if it is difficult for these to work, then what should we approach them differently? Should we be thinking about them differently? And I'm kind of on the fence between the two. I really like cities in some ways, but then I also really love the country. So I'm speaking out of both sides of my mouth on this on this subject. I love both, but I feel like there's places for both. And especially as we look at the kingdom of God is not limited to place. Like, we're not stuck. We don't have to say, well, I'm not in the city, so I can't spread the gospel, or I'm somehow handicapped. It just doesn't work that way. There's so much opportunity if you want opportunity. And I just had to, we've had that kind of mentality with foreign mission. Like, can we go, how can we spread the gospel? Americans don't care. They're not interested. I have to go in the foreign field to be able to really be effective. But I heard a brother recently that was asked to go somewhere, and they said, well, they would like to go, but they are actually so busy that they just said they're going to ask the church whether they should go or not, because they feel like they have so much opportunity and they're so busy where they're at serving people that they can hardly feel like they're justified to go to a foreign country. And I think that's a great place to be, and we can be there anywhere we are in the world. Like, there are places that are better than others, but I think if you have a heart for people, you can always find opportunity. But why have Amish and Mennonites stayed in the country? And that's a really, people get just, I've repeatedly heard this about Amish and Mennonites. Well, they just stick out in the country. They're just rural people. They can't go to the cities. They're not equipped for cities. They can't do that. And that has also been the explanation of why they fail when they try to do city missions. But our culture, I think, is very well equipped for country ministry. And some of the reasons for that is that the way cities work. So city life is built around a cash economy. So everything is figured by time. Time has a value attached to it. And so the other side of that coin is that good community is built on time. You cannot have a good community without having time. If you are in a city where your every hour seems like it's worth $75 an hour, you begin to really start wondering about it's almost impossible to not apply that to every little thing you do. You eventually are thinking, well, this is costing me. This is costing me. I can't sit here and talk to my neighbor because I'm losing money. Now, that's also filtering into rural communities because of the way our world is working. It's kind of becoming more and more everywhere. But we become way more conscious of wasted time, and the time we waste now I'm not talking about scrolling through your phone, but the time you waste with other people is usually not wasted. That's usually building relationships. That's usually a good thing. Especially when you talk about children and old people, having time for them, sick people. There's just so many people around us that just take time. And if you don't have that time because you are so invested in the cash economy, it makes it very difficult to reach people. It also makes it really high pressure because you need to reach people in a certain amount of time. And we had a little discussion here before we started talking just a little bit about neighbors that want to go to church that maybe aren't super interested in the gospel message itself, but really interested in the community. That is I think that that's a pattern that we can actually use, and we can help. We can bring those people into alignment with the gospel and make disciples eventually, but it'll take a lot of time. And that time thing, it just doesn't fit our North American cash economy ideals. And we just need people to get them up there and get them to accept Jesus and get them baptized and move on with the program. But it takes time to reinvent to renew their mind. I mean, obviously, Jesus says he will renew our minds, but then he also gives us an assignment list for that. If you look at in Philippians, he gives us a whole assignment list for renewing our minds. So that all takes time, and if we are too invested in the cash economy, that really cuts back on the availability of our time. Cities have higher living expenses because we trade living expenses for time, convenience. Everything, it's easier to buy everything than it is to actually do things ourselves. So we don't have to spend so much time on menial tasks. If we live in a big apartment building, we don't have to mow the yard. It's easier. You don't have to worry about flower beds and all this, all the things that people do that have a house. But the trade-off to that is then we're buying beans in a can. And the days of ladies sitting around helping each other snap beans, corn days, some of the things that really have been foundational in our communities, in our community life, which I think that community life is very important. So we've traded in a cash economy. We've traded this circle of ladies snapping beans for, we have to grab a few minutes and and maybe the ladies can leave their children somewhere and run to Starbucks for a little, and some coffee, and then we just buy beans in a can. So I feel like that's a breakdown of community, and a negative of cities is this trading time for convenience. And cities also are very restrictive of at-home businesses. So if you want to have an at-home business, it's very difficult to do. Which I feel, again, at-home businesses are crucial to the community, to our children's lives. Unless you're very, very good at what you do, it's extremely hard to do. To raise children with a healthy outlook on life without having something for them to do. And and cities usually have a really good opportunities for working with jobs that don't involve manual labor. So if you don't want to work with your hand, the city is actually a great place to find a job that you don't have to. And you really and they make good money. And you actually, if you want to survive in a city, you need to learn how to work without actually building things, doing things like our communities are used to, just to be able to make the amount of money that you need to be able to live in a city. But the downside to that is then you need to spend some time in formal education. So we have trade-offs. If you want to be able to make the amount of money it takes to live there, then you need to have the education it takes to get the job it takes to be able to live there. And I feel like higher education is not a bad thing. We need doctors, we need people that can interpret legal documents. We need those kind of people, and they're valuable to us. I don't think we need a whole lot of them. I think our communities have done very, very well in the way that they're structured, with small businesses and places where people can work with their children and can work with their hands. The downside to a higher education that's required for some of the city lifestyle things is that it usually leads to delayed marriage. And I am pro young marriage. I think our people should be getting married younger. Now, obviously, some of you may come from communities where they get married pretty young, but in the community that I would have grown up in, 20 to 25 was kind of the average marriage window there. But I've noticed even in the later years that it was climbing. Like it seemed like it was people were older and older when they're getting married, and I feel like this is a bad thing for several reasons. One of them is because you'll naturally will have less children just because you have a smaller time window, and smaller families. We'll talk a little bit about that later. But then also some of these young people have, if you're not supporting a family, you end up having more cash, and some of this cash ends up being used, especially for a young person, ends up being used unwisely. So cities are built for the individual, and they penalize larger families. So if you go to a city, and you want to get on a bus, if I want to go jump on the bus, it's $2, no big deal. But if I want to take my wife and 6 children on a bus, all of a sudden that's way more money. I mean, we're multiplying that $2 times 8. So all of a sudden this trip that would cost me $2 costs our family $16. And if you go to a coffee shop or a restaurant or, just sidewalks, when you have 8 people trying to walk down a sidewalk in a group, it's just way more difficult. If I'm by yourself, no big deal. Like it's perfect for one person. For family, it just doesn't work very well. And they're built that way on purpose because cities are not built for large families. They're built for individuals. And this is a positive and a negative in a city, because in a city, if you have a large family, it is immediately you stand out. Like everybody's looking. So that is a very valuable witnessing tool that you would have in a city, because people see all these. They're like, wow, all these children. I love the way Levi Smucker likes to say. He says when people ask him about his children, he's like, and whenever somebody says how many children they have, his stock reply is always, "Is that all?" Like if you say, "Well, I have 6 children," he'll be like, "Is that all?" If you say you have 12 children, he'll be like, "Is that all?" So I like that reply. And I think church groups on family size, I think a church group, if you observe church groups, you can see that the pattern of family size is directly related to a church's drift. So family size almost always gets smaller as the church becomes more worldly. And look around a little bit and see if that's true or not. And cities reward wage workers. So getting a good job is core to living a good city life. But if you want to have a thriving community, it works better to have farms and small businesses, because it gives us the flexibility to be able to interact when we need to. We're not. If you're stuck in wage labor, which we see this happen. I see this happening even in a lot of Amish communities around where I live. People that are, if there's too many people in a community that are in wage labor, it really makes the community much more difficult to work well together, because everybody has their jobs where they can't. Now, if everybody works the same hours all the time, it works fine, or can work okay. But just like the small prayer group that I'm a part of, one of the guys works in a hospital, and the other guy works in a landscaping crew. And the hospital guy's not on there anymore, but he used to have a guy in the hospital, and he was always, his hours were weird. Like they would be a couple 12-hour days, and he wasn't sure exactly when they would line up. Then the next guy, he's doing landscaping, so he's always leaving at 6 o'clock in the morning. So we can't, like, our our ability to connect is just way more difficult. And some of those things, they don't have the flexibility because they work for somebody that they agreed to work for a certain period of time, and they can't just say, well, hey, I'll be there 30 minutes later this morning because I have prayer. It's more like they have to be there. And I think small businesses are really good for communities because they also allow us to give us the opportunity to have employment for old people, for teenagers, for disabled people. They give us that flexibility. And the reason I'm talking about work here again is that in cities, it's very difficult to do small business unless you can do small repair, handyman kind of stuff. That's probably your biggest window there. But a lot of things are very highly regulated. You can't keep any work trucks at your house, and just there's so much red tape around that it makes it really hard. So I feel like those are things where rural communities really shine, is that we can have small businesses, we can employ our young people, we can employ our disabled, older people. We have room for that, and that can be done. Cities are a great place to get to know people, but many of those people that live there come and go all the time. In our neighborhood, people come and we don't even live in a city. We're still in a town, and people come and go. Like, we have a couple close neighbors that have been there all the time, but then we have apartment buildings close to us that people are regularly moving in and out of. And this makes it really hard to really invest in their lives, because you get to know them, and about that time they're gone. They're moving somewhere else. And city lifestyles are really high stress, and women suffer the most. There's just way more pressure in cities. There's more things happening. There's more things going on. There's more ways for things to go wrong. You have teenage boys that you need something to do with, and dad's at work. There's nothing except school for the boys to do. And how some of you probably know how well it works for have teenage boys sit in a classroom all day long for week after week. I think it's a bad idea. You put them out on a carpenter crew, and a lot of stuff can get done, but you stick them in a classroom and a lot of things can go wrong. And they don't have enough physical labor to really be tired. And so you end up with it really stresses. I feel like it's an unhealthy environment, especially if women are the only ones to have to deal with that. Now, if you had a man that was actually over them, you could probably use some of that could probably work. But especially if you're talking about homeschooling, it's tricky. And without outside work to do, gardens, things like that, where women would normally socialize around many of those things, they're stuck with coming up with other ways to socialize, which means they're again coming up with some artificial get together that doesn't create community in the same way as actually working together and doing things for each other. And most of these ways to socialize are away from home. They're not even in the house or at the place. They're somewhere else. They need to be, because many times again, we have smaller living spaces in cities. And a lot of times they're spiritual or intellectual in nature. So then you have women that are really having a hard time. It's hard to integrate children into this because children interrupt and you can't figure out what's happening, think about what's going on. If you're pulling weeds, children, as long as they don't pull the tomato plants, are good. But if you're trying to discuss something that's deep in nature, having children interrupt is just very difficult to do. So I'm not saying that these things should never happen. I'm just saying if that is what we normally are always trying to do, if that's our normal way of socializing, it becomes difficult. And this also makes children a lot less secure because they're always, they always need to be going to the babysitter, or, you end up with a daycare mentality. You need to get those children somewhere else, something else to do. And it makes children seem more burdensome. So, and another thing in a city where you have a lot of people living in small quarters and already feel like they're kind of right close to the edge of what they can handle, then if you have a large family, or even just a medium-sized family, everybody's a little bit on edge. Like, I hope they don't drop their children off at our place. This is going to be, what are we going to do? Like, so there again, it creates a negativity against families, which I feel is like a bad idea. So when we there's the city side, but on the rural side, every one of those has the good side of it. We can create a thriving community in rural areas without having and avoid most of these negatives. Like, most of these negatives we don't have to worry about. So my vision for rural churches, for churches in the country, is let's not create huge churches. Like, that's been our habit, is these big churches that just are kind of not focused. It's more like, let's go to church there, and we'll go there for Sunday, and then we'll go home and just do our thing. And then we have the kind of the opposite extreme of that, where you have like churches like Intentional Christian Community, like Caneyville, where you have a community, which I love the community side of it, but then we are stuck in a back in a with just a couple people by themselves. Your church has no way to influence those around you very well, because you're all kind of holed up by yourselves. So I think we could find ways between those two extremes. I really love one of the things I love about living in town like we do is the ability to really connect with your community because we're close. The proximity thing is really nice. We all live within, it's probably about 3 miles now. The one family that's the furthest away. They're about 3 miles away, but it probably takes about 15 minutes to get to our side of town because they have to go through downtown to get here. So that's a downside. But living in close community has been really great. I've really enjoyed that. And I've been a part of church before that has had that vision in the country. And if we can all be close enough to each other where we can get together for things, it's just so much better than being way far away. If we're 30 minutes, 40 minutes away from each other, that we can't really interact very well. And some of that, especially in the Midwest, as you start looking at big churches and big churches and big farms, big farming communities. If you have 1,000 acres, your neighbors are going to be really far away, unless you're strategically living somehow where you can be closer to your neighbors. So that's not really a great thing either. And I think the kind of the perfect in between is to be able to have smaller acreages. If you're going to farm, like, figure out ways, like produce farming, I think has been a very good thing for plain communities, because it has allowed people to have smaller farms. It has also allowed people to use more hand labor and more child labor, if you want to put it that way, versus if you're in have a big tractor farm, it's very difficult to have that family feeling. In rural churches, you have a big advantage of having a lot of flexibility. Usually rural communities, if you want to start a business, it's basically just start it, and you don't usually have zoning bothering you, or city ordinances, or how late you can make noise at night, and all these things that are difficult to actually have a business. But too many of us have decided to just do this back as far back away from the road as we can, so nobody bothers us, and get back there where nobody's. But I think there again, a small business that has a public face, like even something like a sawmill that has a public face, you can still interact a lot with the community, and if you're intentional about using that interaction, you can influence as many people as you could if you were, just walking up and down the street in the city. Obviously, country people are pretty interested in their guns and in their patriotism mostly, which makes them a little bit trickier to like. I feel like in some ways they're closer to the gospel, but in some ways they're further away because they don't see the differentiation between kingdom gospel and and many of them the way they believe. So I think there's trade-offs because we're dealing with people that maybe already have their own ideas, but it's good in that we can have many of those people are interested, and I've seen many of them come and join kingdom churches because they're tired of what they have. And I feel like we have many small churches scattered throughout the U.S. Those people that are interested in communities and not just in getting together and having our little social thing and not including anyone else, we can really do well as country churches. And it also allows us to have usually country churches are way less, our living costs are way less. And so that allows us to really be able to invest in our families, have more time to invest in each other. So many of those things we can do without having to worry about what our time is worth. Another thing that I have kind of what I want to close with here is that I think one of the perfect places to do that is in Hawaii, because there's communities over there that they have divided up into many smaller acreages, like 1 to 3 acre lots. Some of them are a little bit bigger, some of them are 6, some of them are 20. But there's big communities that they have done this in. And they have been largely undeveloped because they thought everybody was going to move over there back in the 60s. So they just divided up all this land and they never actually did this. And I've really dreamed about kingdom communities, multiple kingdom communities. They could live fairly close to each other. Because we're thinking about much smaller acreages, and we wouldn't have to be really far apart. We could still be within a mile or two and still have pretty good exposure to our neighbors because our neighbors would be close. And it's a little bit like a small town, where in a small town you can be close, but you can also be far away and have people in between you. So I think that we should be thinking about areas when we're looking to start churches. We should be thinking about areas where we can live close to people and still live in the country. Because if you are totally isolated, it makes it really hard to interact with people. And I feel like our families are a really good way to witness to people, because they see our families, they see who we are, they see how we live in our daily lives. And if they can't see that, then they can't really tell who we are. And I've heard of one man's testimony. Some of you may know him, John Freeman. He said that they actually watched the Mennonites in their area for 3 years before they ever attended church. I think that's the way it was. Like they noticed them, they interacted with them, some in public, but they just weren't sure. So they watched them for 3 years. And if you think about the implications of somebody watching you for 3 years before they ever come to your church, they need to be able to see you. They need to be able to see who you are. They need to be able to get an idea of what you stand for that's not just a public facing, not just a face where you're putting on, where they can actually see how you really do live. So I really think that is something that we have, that there's a strong point of our community. People can see how we live. People can see how we interact with the world. They can see how we do business. And if we do that in a good way, I believe our rural churches have so much potential. But when we do things like kind of selfishly accumulate all the good stuff for ourselves and hide from our neighbors and only go interact with people that are like us, and cheat people in business, and some of those things become pretty obvious really quickly, and then people they kind of hate plain people because they're the bad guys. And I feel like that we should really deal harshly with that in our churches. If that shows up, I think we should really be willing to take care of that quickly and not allow people to. I think too many plain churches have allowed people to engage in these kind of things, and then that creates a very bad taste in our neighbors. Like in the country, another problem in the country that we have is that news spreads really fast. In a city, you can do something bad and nobody would figure it out because there's so much bad happening. But in the country, when you do something that you shouldn't, it seems like the whole county knows within a very short amount of time. So that is a good thing and a bad thing. We can leverage that for good. We can leverage that for bad. So those are my thoughts. Any questions?
Well, thanks so much, Brother Hector. I was looking forward for this talk, and you shared some things that, give me, I think will give us all some food for thought. My family and I, we lived in the town of Shippensburg for about 2 years. And I feel like for myself, I see both sides. Also, I think that's kind of what you're saying, Hector, that there's positives and negatives to the city life versus the rural country life. But when we lived in Shippensburg, we had a lot of neighbors really close to us. And I don't think any of them that I'm aware of actually, if they went to church, it was not on a regular basis. And there was a lot of needs around there and a lot of difficult situations some of our neighbors were walking through while we lived there. And it gave us a lot of opportunity to witness to them, to share with them, to pray with them, to have them in our home. But the negative side was our family was growing. I'd go to work every day, and I'd come home. My wife would tell me the boys were bouncing off the walls. There's nothing for them to do. So that probably has been our biggest question for people that live in the city. How are you doing it, and how are you doing it, and how are you doing it well? But we ended up leaving town, and we moved where we live now, which we have about 2 acres and lots of animals and things to do. But leaving town, there was the side of, I remember the day we're leaving, I felt like I'm letting my neighbors down. It's like we were here for them to, available for them to talk. If they needed somebody to talk to, we were here, and now we're leaving. And so it's that side of feeling like I'm letting my neighbors down. So I like the thought you were sharing is kind of how can we find the happy medium, where we're not living in the city, losing our community life, but still living in an area where we can have an impact in a positive way, where we have neighbors that are close by. So, I appreciate your thoughts there, brother.
Yeah, talking about boys bouncing off the walls, that is such a common. I see that, like, our community right now is growing, like, so most of the people moved here in their mid 30s or lower 30s. So as our families mature, we're seeing, what are we going to do with teenage boys? Like, we didn't have teenage boys for a long time. Now we have teenage boys. Now what are we going to, like? so we're coming up against those questions, and I feel like some of them are good, and I mean some of them are valid thoughts to think about. Some of them are maybe more maybe amplified by our fears, like maybe they're not quite as, I feel like some of the concerns are maybe not quite as valid as people think they are, because they get more amplified, because the more you worry about something, the worse it gets. But yeah, I see your thing with like neighbors, like even us talking about moving to Hawaii. We have neighbors around us now. I'm like, well, if we leave, like that would be disaster. Like is it really worth uprooting and moving, across the world somewhere, when we have all these people around us that we know now, that we've really invested in their lives, and we feel like they're closer than they've ever been to, really joining the kingdom, and then we just walk off on them. That just seems like a tragedy. But then at the same time, as I look at my family, and it's just there's so many things. Like my oldest son now is 16, and I have all boys except for one girl. I have one girl, five boys, one girl. And yeah, it's just a whole different ballgame. It's not like, kicking them out. But then on the flip side of that, I grew up in the country. I grew up way out in the moon. I mean, it wasn't the boondocks; it was actually more like a grass. But and I was bored to death. Like as a teenager, I was so bored. I got into all kinds of stuff because I was so bored, not because there was absolutely nothing to do, but more because there was just nothing. There was nothing interesting to do. So I think we can do. I mean, I think both of those can be a problem. Like the cities do have a lot of interesting things to do. Like I feel like my boys have so much more opportunity to do interesting things than I did when I was their age. But at the same time, when I'm gone for work and I come home, and I have 5 boys at the house and with my wife, that's a bad deal. That's just not a good. That's not a good thing.
Yeah, well, I think for my boys, they were getting bored to death in town, and when they talk about it today, they talk about it with resentment. That was the worst living in town. But now we live out in the country, and they have some little old antique tractors they work on, and yeah, a lot more. Yeah, we live along a creek, and there's just a lot more to do out here.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, what a blessing. If there's anyone in the audience that would like to ask Hector a question or make a comment, please do so. You should be able to unmute yourself.
Yeah, Hector, I want to thank you for taking the time and for presenting this in a good, well-balanced way, giving the pros and cons on both sides. I don't know that I have any questions. I think it's because you just did a really good job at presenting things as they are, and definitely a lot of food for thought. I want to thank you for your time.
You're welcome. So, Ephraim, I guess that's your name.
That's right.
That's coming up on the screen there. So I'm going to call you Ephraim. So where do you live?
In Berks County, not that far from Reading, just outside of Lancaster County.
Okay, country or not?
Yeah, we're in the country. At the same time, we do have a lot of people around us. Adamstown's just down the road, and a bunch of neighbors around us. It's been enjoyable to get to know the neighbors. It probably took us longer than it should have, but it feels like we're getting to know them a little more, and they're starting to, one neighbor comes over, gets something welded, the other neighbor asks if he can use the skid loader, and it's just using each other's things back and forth without even thinking about, what do I owe you? And I just really enjoy that.
Yeah, that's amazing part. I mean, that's what I love about rural communities. It can also, I mean, we actually have that now in town too. Like we have neighbors that stop by that know that we have things that they can borrow, and the worst thing that I feel about it is that they don't have things we can borrow back as much. And I've heard that you aren't really a part of your neighborhood until you're borrowing things from them. Like as long as they're borrowing things from you, they just see you as a sugar daddy. But when you're borrowing things from them, then you become a part of the neighborhood. So I've kind of explored that idea a little bit, like what can I borrow from my neighbors? A lot of them live in apartments, don't have much to borrow.
That is an interesting comment. I've heard similar things said, and we have a Mennonite family that lives less than a mile up the road, and they have a little homestead kind of like we do. So whenever they go on a trip, they ask us to take care of their animals, and then we've done the same when we went on a trip. But the one time it didn't work for them, and I ended up asking a neighbor much closer to us, kind of I guess across the road, and they don't have animals, and you don't know how well they would take care of them. But I just felt like here's my opportunity to help build a bridge with my neighbor and go and ask them if they could take care of our animals while we're gone. But no, I think that helps to create trust and uh, feel needed and create good
Yeah.
vibes.
Yeah, we do have a neighbor that actually takes care of our animals when we're gone. He's usually, and which is kind of, usually when our church, the downside to our close community is that when our church does something, we all do it together. So then we have, and a lot of people have a house dog or something, and it's like all of a sudden there's, 6 dogs that somebody needs to take care of. We don't have any dogs ourselves, but we have a bunch of, we have other various animals, some black market animals, but we have 3 pigs right now. But our neighbor, he's pretty good about taking care of the animals. Like if we want to, he's offered many times, and we weren't sure if we wanted to let him, but then because he doesn't have a lot of background in animals, but he's done a good job. Whenever he's takes care of the animals, he does a really good job and enjoys it and doesn't want to take anything for it. So,
Well, another thought I'm having, and I'm trying to put my thoughts into words. You mentioned about living in your rural community. The ladies are snapping green beans together. The children are helping, conversations happening, communities being built. If you live in more of a city setting, you drop your children off for somebody to babysit, and the ladies go to a restaurant, Starbucks, or coffee shop, wherever they may go, try to create community. But it's not happening like it does in a rural setting. Am I kind of
right,
maybe
correct.
rewording it the way you said it, but in a similar way? Have you seen, and you're probably putting some of my questions into words, kind of. I feel like the whole city church planting is maybe like for myself, I've been watching it, maybe 15 years now or something like that. I'm not sure. It seems like a fairly new idea still to myself,
Right.
which I've been supportive of the idea. It's kind of like professional fishermen. They don't go fishing in a mud puddle. They go to, large lakes and stuff. So we're serious about fishing for people. We go where the people are. That's something I've said a lot in the past, but I find myself rapidly in a different place now, way different than like 10 years ago, or even 8 years ago, with teenagers in my home. And as my children I guess as my children have gotten older, I've thought about these things. Like I grew up on a dairy farm. We did a lot of, vegetables and stuff. We sit around as a family, snapping green beans and whatever we're doing, and conversation is happening, ideas are being shared. The wisdom from the older ones is being passed to the younger ones. And I think that's the wonderful thing about the farming community is you're all working together, older and younger is working together, and values are being passed down. Then you try to reduplicate that in the city. And you're probably a lot closer to it than I am. Are you seeing that happening in a healthy way where the values of the older ones are being passed down to the younger ones? I tend to see that as a problem in our society in general, is that the values aren't being passed down. Like everybody's trying to reinvent a new way to live that nobody has ever done, basically done it before.
Right.
Somehow it's supposed to work, but it's like a brand new experiment.
Yeah, and I think that is a real down. I mean, I think that's why many of these city mission ideas are failing, is because we're trying to reinvent the entire thing from the bottom up. Where I would still contend, I mean, like, even if you are going to do a city church plant, like, I would love to see it done. Like, my vision of a city church plant would be to go to a city that is maybe a little bit depressed, like not quite as wealthy, and buy houses in neighborhoods that are maybe more rougher neighborhoods that you can that can be cleaned up and kind of redeemed, and then live close together, like live within the same block or two, like, or live really close together. Because I feel like we have this. I mean, I was just talking to I can't remember his name right now, a single man from Jeff. Jeff is his first name, from Boston. He was just here. And I was talking to him about his church experience, and he said his church experience in the Malden Towers, their Followers of the Way group. He said those were the best 3 years of his church life ever, because they lived in close community. They all lived in this one apartment building, so everybody was right there. They could just go up and down, maybe a floor or two, and then they're just right there. So anything that needed to happen could happen easily because they were all right there. But then there's other problems with that, like you say, like, if we're reinventing the whole thing from the bottom up, what kind of values are you going to pass on to your children? What if if we have valued manual labor, like that's been our heritage, but then we move somewhere where manual labor doesn't pay the bills, so we have to do something on a computer, and then it's just really hard to figure. It's really hard when we have to reinvent our society all the way from the bottom up. So that's why I feel like if we move to a place where we could live in close community, if we're going to live in the city, let's live in close community, but then let's pick areas that are not, don't have housing associations and strict zoning laws, to where we can actually do some things that are still our heritage. Like, maybe we can buy an empty lot and put in a garden where we can actually do things together that we're used to, that we know how to do. And I think those things can be a big testimony then to those around us. But I still don't. It doesn't totally solve the problem of, what do you do with teenage boys? I feel like that is probably the biggest question that I've heard from anybody, anywhere, and it continually comes up. It's like, okay, this is all a great idea, but what do you do with teenage boys? I mean, especially when you live in a college town, like that's one thing that I think about a lot. Is I'm in a college town. I have these, I have all these boys, and if you're in a college town, there's a lot of drinking, a lot of immodesty, and it's like, wow, this is just like not a great place. Like, in general, we're not in downtown where most of them are, but it's still something always comes up every summer, especially. I'm like, wow, this is just not ideal.
Yeah, I really appreciate these thoughts, Hector. And so it sounds like you haven't heard anybody give a really, really good solution of what to do with the teenage boys in town.
Yeah, that would be true.
Yeah, well, I appreciate your talk. I lived in Malden Towers myself, so.
Okay, wow.
And I know Jeff Todd.
There you go. That's him.
Yeah. So yeah, he's a older brother that's I think a very good asset to the kingdom. So yeah, I was wondering, is he staying with you guys up there quite a bit, or?
No, he's come through. Well, as you know, he works remotely, so he can work anywhere in the world he wants to. He's been in Hawaii for a while, and then he just came back, and I think he's going to be here. He was here for about a week, and then he was going to go back to Boston, and he's going to go to India for a week or two. So since he can work remotely, he just has to work. He said he has to work East Coast hours. So if he's somewhere like Hawaii, he has to get up in the middle of the night and work until 11 o'clock in the morning, and then he's done. But yeah, he just works remotely. He doesn't, and they've regrouped with the one of the neighboring congregations. I don't remember which one it was.
Was Woburn Church or
No,
okay.
no, it's with the one. I mean, were you up there when Nate? With Nate, what was his name? The young red-haired guy.
Nathan Markle?
No, single guy. Wayner.
We're not talking
Yeah.
about
That Nate.
Nate Warner?
Yeah.
Okay, so he's part of the Malden, I mean the Brackenbury group.
Yep. That sounds right. Yeah, Brackenbury.
Is that where Jeff Todd's going to church now?
Yeah, he's regrouped with them. Yep.
Okay. Because they're still part of Followers of the Way, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, he still is. Yes. So I didn't realize you were up there. So here's a guy with some experience. Let's see what he had to say.
Well, I was in an expensive tower, and it wasn't a very good feeling when you're running out of money. So
yeah, I really love to hear your perspective on that. Like, I feel like they have a lot of good things happening there, but like living in an apartment building like that, what did you do for a living?
well, I was a carpenter, and if it wouldn't been for Mennonites around there, or people that came from Mennonite background that were doing it, probably would have had a hard time finding it work enough to make it. I went there with enough money that I could make it for a while, but after a while you're gonna be out of money. I think one of the biggest things that I hated is if I came home with my van and I had no place to park, and that was terrible. You could probably go down the road quite a ways to find a place to park, but yeah, in Malden Towers, you get in there, and my van had too tall of a roof to get under the towers where the parking spaces were. There, you could pay for it, and we would pay for the minivan, but sometimes you get home and your paid spot is taken.
Oh well.
You can get them towed, but I never wanted to get somebody towed, so we just go back out and we find a visitor parking spot. But sometimes those were all full. So yeah, you drive in there, you park your van where you're not supposed to, and you kind of keep an eye on it. As soon as somebody leaves, you quickly go down the elevator and get your van into that spot. And we were on the 10th floor, so yeah, it wasn't done that quickly. Now, there's something about the city that I actually liked. I don't know how to explain it. It's just like there's something about the country you like, and you just get a feeling of it. It's something that kind of I can see why people like it. But yeah, coming back to the country a little bit more. Like, we're still in a town, but it's a lot more country. It's a lot more. It's probably closer to a country than a big city. So
The people are maybe a little friendlier. Is that right?
yeah, in a sense, I would always, if I go back to the city, I would always want to go to a city that would not have as many people. I mean, maybe not as many people, but also they would not be as rich people.
Yeah.
Where I feel like I could reach them better. And where we're at is very poor people, and I've always had this idea of helping people that are poor. You can actually help them, do something for them. And a rich person, a lot of times they have everything they need. They don't need anything that you can do for them. So it's kind of my thoughts.
So Atlee, you would have, how long were you up there?
We were in Malden Towers, I think, almost 6 months.
Okay.
Not quite. Might have been 5 months. And then we lived in Bellingham for a little bit too. So before we were.
So, did you have any observations on the teenage boy question?
I don't know if there were many of them there. A lot of the big families had just left.
Okay, because like the Milliones would have had. I mean, they have some older children. Curavillas have some. Their
They,
boys are about.
yeah, Matthew Millione does have some teenagers, I think. I'm trying to think because he's got a bunch of girls there too, So
Yeah, a lot of his older children probably girls. I don't know.
yeah, I think they had one 19 or 20-year-old teenager and one that was younger. So yeah, I think he would have had two of them in that age range, but he had girls as well. So
Yeah, I think that'd be, in order to crack the code, we're gonna have to figure out a good way for teenage boys to be able to be, like, I think there's ways to do it, and I'm still working on that. But if I figure it out, I'll let y'all know. Or if I see somebody that has, that's the other thing I mean, I've heard like the Fox family that lived in the ones that started the Gomer to Praise singing, like that is actually why those boys were doing this singing, is because they had time on their hands and they had these teenage boys and they needed a way to engage them, and so they started singing, and then they ended up doing some pretty it really got pretty deep into singing, which they've blessed a lot of people, but at the same time I'm not sure. I'm not wanting to pressure my boys towards the arts. Like we've done some blacksmithing, and my oldest boy now has bought a lawnmower and he's doing lawn mowing, and I've really been trying to think about how I can help them do some kind of business enterprise that really care about, and they engage them without that they can do based out of our home without having to go away, and I mean to be absent a lot, or whatever you want to call that.
yeah, I was going to say one thing that I remember happening a lot with those teenage children. I think the girls were involved as well sometimes, but they might have taken like their bikes and went on down the sidewalks or or went on walks, that way to parks and places like that.
Yeah.
And I think in Boston it was a little safer to do that. They didn't have as much crime in some areas as like a lot of cities do. Like you did not see many people out on the street with a sign. In Boston, that was just not that well known. I know one place where used to see a guy like that, and yeah, it was kind of awkward. If you went out there with a sign saying about Christianity or something. Dan said they tried it one time, and everybody's like, "Oh yeah, I want to give you money," and like after. So yeah, it's just not. It's a little different there. You almost have to adapt to what you're living in there. So
Yeah.
Yeah. Very
Yeah, no,
good.
great stuff.
Yeah, well, it's definitely been a blessing here this morning. I don't know if there's anyone else that needs to say something or not. Definitely want to give the time here. Yeah, well, we're past 7 o'clock now, so I really appreciate the conversation and all that. It'll give us a lot to talk about in the days to come. So thank you so much, Brother Hector. Really appreciate it. Would you like to close in prayer?
Sure. I've really enjoyed talking with y'all. I mean, especially here with the perspectives and questions that y'all have had. Like that gives me more perspective on the same things that I care about. So I didn't realize, Atlee, that you ever lived at Malden Towers. So that was, I don't know, pretty interesting there to get Jeff Todd's perspective of. Like I was really surprised with all that went down up there with he just longing for that community. Like he's like those 3 years just the absolute best he's ever had. And you could tell that he really missed that. So yeah, fascinating to be on here with you and be trying to tell the story when you really know a little more about it than I do. So yeah, very interesting. Let's pray. Father, we thank you for this privilege of being together here this morning and talking about how to do church. And Lord, I pray that we could learn to know more of how you would have us work and how you would have us to operate your church and how you would have us to live. And Lord, I pray that you would just bless this time we've had here together, and that the seeds that are sown could grow, and that many churches could be started for your glory. I pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Guide me, oh, the great Jehovah, be